here at Aston, the conception of the COO role is I effectively run all of the functions that are operational. So that would embrace our estate, our buildings, our facilities management. It embraces digital in all of its myriad parts. So the provision of digital services, the creation of the digital architecture, but also the move of the organisation to a digital organisation. It involves data and the building out of a data function, but also a change and transformation unit as well. As an HR director, I was already thinking about actually collaboration with colleagues in digital, colleagues in my case, in estates. Because, for instance, how have we tackled the challenges post-COVID of creating flexibility, creating a place where people can work in different ways? That's not just a people challenge. That's a challenge of how do we create the spaces that allow people to work in those different ways? How do we create the environment that provides for greater flexibility, but a better employee experience? And then thinking about employee experience, the digital piece is so important to not just enabling different ways of working, but also curating the people experience now. So I sort of feel it is a logical step, and I am seeing more and more people take that step. Whereas perhaps previously, HR directors hit a bit of a glass ceiling in organizational terms. I actually think the skill sets and the way in which, as a profession, we've focused over the last few years probably makes it more likely that there are steps beyond HR director and HR functional leadership into wider organizational leadership roles. So I suppose part of my transition anyway, as the HR director onto the board, I think was partly driven by my approach, which has always been an approach about actually what's the art of the possible? What is the challenge here, and how can we best serve that enterprise purpose? And how do we deliver solutions which meet the needs of the organization? In a sense, I don't think there's anything different in the COO role in that respect. It is about actually understanding the direction of travel, what's our ambition, and how can we best leverage and focus a wider group of services in the service of the enterprise, really. So I do think my time as Chief People Officer has really helped me in that transition, has really prepared me in a sense. I'd also reflect that I think there is a point in time here that actually the Chief Operating Officer's role has changed. And I think it makes it more likely that people who have experience as an HR director are probably much more capable of stepping up into a COO role than perhaps historically they have been. It's not unusual to see a lot of finance professionals having taken on COO roles. And really now, the COO role has moved from being a compliance role and perhaps a risk-based role, much more to a role whereby actually those central services in any organization are seen as the engine of change. And of course, for a long time, as an HR director, that has been the world that I've immersed myself in. And I actually think having a set of lenses, which is about people and about culture and about actually how to change and evolve the organization, is massively helpful in terms of thinking about a much wider set of set of services. So while obviously I'd like to think that moving to a COO is based purely on my own personal brilliance, I actually think it's probably not. It's probably more based upon the fact that actually this is an evolution rather than a step change. A lot of the way that certainly I think about the organization doesn't change, but actually what I do is bring that to a slightly different context. And ultimately, it is about how do we create a more agile and purposeful organization? And how do we create the conditions for people to thrive and to deliver? The number one challenge has been thinking about actually what my purpose is and what the role is and how I can bring my skill set and deploy it most effectively across a much, much wider remit. So that's been the number one challenge. I would say connected with that has been, as the chief people officer, I was obviously calling on 20 years of experience working with people and within that function. And so I suppose my seniority was underpinned by a deep understanding of workforce, of change, and you know, policy, process, and procedure in terms of HR. Now I'm managing a group of services where I don't have a deep history and a deep professional background in any of those services. What, however, I do bring is the experience of leadership of function, but also leadership in a strategic context, actually how to leverage that leadership. So that's been a challenge, I suppose, thinking about how do I do that in a context which brings digital and space and data and change and transformation, which is much, much wider than just the workforce parts of it. And then I suppose the third challenge is probably a more prosaic challenge, which is getting used to the acronyms, which are used in all of those functions. And suddenly, I'm immersed in a property world and in a digital world, and I'm learning a whole new language, in a sense. But actually, a lot of the challenges are very, very familiar. The first piece of advice would be the same advice that I give to people who aspire to be an HR director, which is be clear on your purpose. Why do you want the role, and what would you do with it if you got it? There has to be a real purpose to that. And for individuals clarifying actually why they want it, it has to be more than because it's the next roll up. I think my second piece of advice would be to immerse yourself in the enterprise as a whole and get interested in other aspects of running a business. You have to really step into the shoes of the CIO. What keeps them awake at night? Actually, how can you help them? Not just in an HR sense, but that starts to open up actually different ways of viewing problems and or marketing or data or operations. And then I think that the third piece of advice, I suppose, would be for me about personal resilience as well. It's very easy to get consumed into these big roles, and having the ability, I suppose, to compartmentalize is how I might describe it. The ability to maintain your own energy and your own well-being while taking on some really big, hairy challenges, I think is critical for anyone who's aspiring to take on sort of large leadership roles.